Well, it's Tuesday, and this weekend was pretty rainy. So what I did, I went ahead and just kind of threw some stuff out in the yard. I had to do a little trimming. This purple stuff, they call it Moses and the bulrushes, was growing on the backyard in a big clump. Now, when the ducks were more numerous, they were eating it, keeping it under control. But of course, now that there are very few ducks around, this stuff was taking over. So I'm going to go ahead and mulch that up. I also trimmed my front hedge, which is basically a combination of things. There's some rose leaf aurelia, that's the leaves of this. And these are leaves of the so-called rare hoop vine. And you'll also see there's some other plants in here. This is a 4 o'clock. Just stuff that grows wild. This vine is supposed to be endangered, but in my yard it seems to grow all over. Now, I did some mulching a few days ago. Over here we have the Piper sanctum. This is also known as a root beer plant. And if you break the leaves, it releases a chemical that smells like root beer. It's supposed to be toxic in large amounts, like most plants are, and I guess in small amounts they use it for flavoring. But there's something I wanted to show you. Now, a lot of people talk about how dangerous plants are, and some people think that they're the best thing in the world. Over here, I have a little patch of one of the native plants that used to be very common in this area. Hey, Mrs. Duck, what you doing? You want something to eat? I'll feed you in a little bit, don't worry. But yes, I have these plants right here. Now you can see the Piper sanctum is trying to sprout up. I gotta pull this out. I actually had to cut some of these branches because it was shading these plants. Oh, and I hear thunder in the distance. Now, these plants, they look like ferns, but they're not. This is actually a type of cycad, and the large part of the plant is actually below ground. It has a stem that can be several inches long. I've seen them as long as a foot long. It produces a large root, and from that root comes these fern-like leaves. These were everywhere. You could find them in every pine land, which was a common habitat that we had here in South Florida, which no longer exists. There's only a few of them left. In some of the parks, there's a few houses that still have a few in their yard, but most of it was destroyed because of the out-of-control development that we have here. And a lot of it, even before the development came, was bulldozed. The lumber was cut and used to build these houses, and it was often used just as farmland. A lot of it was turned into mango and avocado groves and citrus groves, and some of it was actually used as cropland. They had a special bulldozer ripper that they called a rock plow, and they would drag that through the land after they removed all of the pine trees and palmettos and of course this, and they wiped it out. But before people began to destroy Florida in the name of profit, actually some of the native people that fled to Florida, which you would call Indians or Seminoles or Miccosukee or whatever you would call them, they were using this as a food source. Believe it or not, the root that's under this thing, which comes out of the ground, was edible if it was specially processed. Now, raw like this, it'll kill you. It is so toxic. You could never eat this. All parts of this plant are highly toxic. This is the reason why most animals and insects don't eat it. There is a specialized blue butterfly that eats this that's endangered. I've seen it a couple of times, and I have to admit, I actually did remove it, which I shouldn't have done because they were eating all the leaves on these Coonties. But I now allow them to do their thing. I have another patch in the backyard, and what I'll do, if I ever see the butterfly come in here, I think it's called an Atala butterfly, I will remove it from here and take it to the back. This way this cluster can continue to survive, and the one in the back, which is in a much sunnier area and far more vigorous, can then deal with the insects that are eating it. But again, those toxins make it inedible to most animals and especially humans. This plant was known as Seminole Bread, or by the more common name, Coontie. Now, the scientific name was Zamia integrifolia, but then later on they changed it to Zamia floridana for obvious reasons, because it's in Florida. This is a very unique plant, but it's not the only cycad that you can find. There's actually another one here, which is commonly used as a landscape plant, although you don't see it much anymore. Hey, Mrs. Duck, but it's being covered up by this tropical oregano, and you can see it right here. These are the type of seeding pods or fruits or whatever you want to call it that cycads make. The red seeds exist within here. These Coonties also produce the same thing, so they're definitely cycads. Also, these cycads were not affected by the Asian cycad scale that took out the sago palms, both the king sago and the queen sago. But these Coonties, believe it or not, are now being used in some native landscape plantings. They're very, very slow growing. These I actually rescued from a job that I was doing back in the 1980s. They were building an office park, and I had a friend that was working there, and he asked me if I knew how to operate a bulldozer. And I said, sure, I know how to operate all equipment. So my job over there was for grading. They were clearing the land, and they were turning it into these offices in a parking lot. So when I got onto the site, the first thing I did, I took my digging bar and I tried to rescue as many of these cycads as I could. So this group, as well as the ones in the backyard, came from that lot. And they've been here. Now remember, that was probably 1988, maybe 87, 88. I don't remember. I was still in college at the time. So I went ahead and brought them here, and they've been growing here ever since. This patio back then, of course, was more open. I didn't have all these banana plants and the large trees, which have grown much more. Now I need to trim this back because this poinciana tree is shading everything. But they've survived all this time. I think there was 8 of them at one time. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Oh, there's still 8. Okay, so they're still surviving. Anyway, when I get ready to move, these can grow anywhere in Florida, so I'm going to take them with me. Any place where the ground doesn't freeze, they can do just fine. So, because I know whoever moves in here, the first thing they're going to do is wipe all this out. So I'm going to beat them to it. All the plants that I can remove, I'm going to remove them. I'm going to load them in my truck and take them to my new location. That's the plan anyway. But in the meantime, I got a bunch of junk I have to deal with. There's garbage everywhere. There's stuff that I want to fix. There's stuff I need to get rid of. This whole thing is a giant mess. So hopefully in the next day or two, right, Mrs. Duck, I will be able to clean this up. And I still have some barrels of diesel that I need to re-refine. I got to do that. Okay, Quacker. So that's it. So anyway, I just wanted to share this with you, a little something you probably never heard of. And if you ever look up Florida Coontie, it is Coontie. And you can see the history of this unique plant. And again, as a survival food, plants will work. But this is not something that I would eat out of choice. Now, when it comes to something I would eat out of choice, hello, there you are. Now that looks delicious. This, not so much.